Welcome back. So glad to have you here today. Last week, we went a little past the specified chapters from the Come Follow Me syllabus, and we ended up covering all of the Book of Mormon instead of just the first 6 chapters. Sorry about that, but I felt there was a continuity of the story that I wanted to put into context. Anyway, today we're going to get a head start on the Book of Ether. By my way of thinking, there is so much in this book that the extra time will serve us well. So let's get to it, shall we? I am always amazed by how much can be said in one well-crafted verse. I've told you in the past about listening to Bruce R. McConkie speak for 45 minutes on one verse in Malachi. And also I've spoken of Hugh Nibley's amazing ability to extract hours of lectures from one chapter or one story in the Book of Mormon. I think it's the phenomenon of the scriptures that they deal in truth. And that truth is so far-ranging and so connected to the whole that we can very easily go down the rabbit hole, as they say, about almost any part of it and find endless treasures. Well, today is no exception. The Book of Ether is an extraordinary book, and the very first verse of Ether 1 says a lot. So we're going to spend some time on just that. Let's read it first. It says, "And now I, Moroni, proceed to give an account of those ancient inhabitants who were destroyed by the hand of the Lord upon the face of this north country." In the next verse, he will clarify that the account comes from the 24 gold plates that were found by Limhi's people. But let's just concentrate on that first verse. When Moroni says, "those ancient people," we have to realize that he is speaking basically in about 420 AD. So ancient to him must be really old. He's taken possession of his father's abridgment of their people, the Nephites, and that story began in 600 BC, 1,000 years earlier. And yet he never refers to them as ancient. So these must be really old people from long before Lehi and Nephi's time. The indication is that they were not part of Nephite genealogy at all, but came and went long before Lehi arrived in the New World. And he says, those people, not a people or some people, but those people, as if we are supposed to know who he's talking about. Well, like I said, the next verse tells us they are the people of the 24 gold plates. But the way he structures the first verse indicates that we should already have heard of them. And indeed, we have. For that, we need to go all the way back to Alma, chapter 63, to be precise. And interestingly, that is over 450 years before Moroni's time. So we know that he must have been as familiar with his father's record as we are asked to be. You know, it's nice when a man's kids will read what his father has left. I'm just saying. Actually, my kids have been great and very supportive of my work, so I appreciate that. Anyway, back to Moroni and Alma. Just coincidentally, the time we are turning to had a Moroni also. He was the son of Helaman and the chief judge of the people. He died and his brother Shiblon took over the records. Now, that's not really important for our discussion, but interesting. Anyway, at that time, the 37th year of the reign of the judges, and 55 years before the birth of Christ, we read this. "And it came to pass that in the 37th year of the reign of the judges, there was a large company of men, even to the amount of 5,400 men, with their wives and their children, departed out of the land of Zarahemla into the land which was northward. And it came to pass that Haggith, he being an exceedingly curious man, therefore he built him an exceedingly large ship on the borders of the land Bountiful by the land Desolation, and launched it forth into the West Sea by the narrow neck which led into the land northward. And behold, there were many of the Nephites who did enter therein, and did sail forth with much provisions, and also many women and children. And they took their course northward, and thus ended the 37th year. And then the record says that Haggith built more ships, and more people sailed northward also. And then it says, and it came to pass that they were never heard of more, and we suppose that they were drowned in the depths of the sea. And it came to pass that in this year there were many people who went forth into the land northward. So we know that there was a grand migration at that time, and I imagine that there were others who followed later, although there is no particular record of that. Now, Alma 63 said, and it came to pass that they were never heard of more. But when we go to Helaman chapter 3, which is only about 9 years later, we read this. And it came to pass in the 46th year, there was much contention and many dissensions, in the which there were an exceedingly many who departed out of the land of Zarahemla, and went forth unto the land northward to inherit the land. And they did travel to an exceedingly great distance, insomuch that they came to large bodies of water and many rivers, yea, and even they did spread forth into all parts of the land. So, you see, there had to be some communication between the migrants and the people of Zarahemla. Otherwise, we would not have known anything about their spread and development. Now listen to this again. They did spread forth into all parts of the land, into whatever parts it had not been rendered desolate and without timber, because of the many inhabitants who had before inherited the land. Now we know this is not referring to the people who left 9 years earlier, because they would not have had time to render the land desolate and disappear. This is referring to people who lived there long ago and who had disappeared long ago. Only their ruins and waste were left as evidence of their presence there. I believe if they had left grand cities and great structures, there would have been mention of that. Those ancient people had faced great calamity and destruction, and it says in the next verse, and now no part of the land was desolate, save it were for the timber. But because of the greatness of the destruction of the people who had before inhabited the land, it was called desolate. So whatever happened to those people, those really old people, it was not pretty, and a sad tale was to be told. These were obviously the people of the north country that Moroni is referring to here in the first verse of Ether chapter 1. And just one more thought here. Helaman said that the people spread throughout all the land northward, and so even though it says they were destroyed, I don't think we can rule out the idea that in some distant corner, in some far-off valley or mountain enclave or some remote place, that there were a few people who managed to escape the destruction. You know, just like those people today who have been found in remote corners of the Amazon, or on Andaman Island in the Indian Ocean, or in Borneo. It seems that there are always some people who manage to survive and can remain hidden from the outside world for a long, long time. For me, it's not a stretch to think that very possibly some few remnants of those people could have survived and even today have genetic markers in some of the indigenous people of America. That's just a thought, certainly not doctrine. So now Moroni has looked through all the records, and he has read the translation of the 24 gold plates that was made by Mosiah, and he has decided to tell us the story of the destruction of those people mentioned in Helaman 3. Whether this was his own idea or not is unclear. Back in Mormon 8, he said, "Behold, I, Moroni, do finish the record of my father. I have but few things to write, which things I have been commanded by my father. So that could mean that Mormon asked him to relate this tale after he was gone. Or he could have received the commandment from the Lord directly. Or he could have just decided that this was a pretty cool story and he thought it ought to be included. But verse 3 says in part, "And I even remain alone to write the sad tale of the destruction of my people." And then just a little bit later he says, "Behold, my father hath made this record, and he hath written the intent thereof. And behold, I would write it also if I had room upon the plates, but I have not, and or I have none, for I am alone." So it's unclear who decided that he should tell the story of the Jaredites. It doesn't really matter. I just find it interesting as I try to get inside the heads of these great men and try to feel what they must have felt as they wrote. But alas, I cannot. For who could really feel what they felt except we should have gone through and seen with our own eyes the things they saw? But I'm so glad that Moroni did write this account because it has some of my favorite parts in it, and the doctrines it contains are the most profound, I believe, of the Book of Mormon. We'll explore some of that this week and next, and maybe even the week after that. There is so much here, and I have been waiting all year to get to this point. Now look, we've just spent 1,600 words talking about 29 words in that first verse. That should give you an idea of how much is in the Scriptures. As you read them, don't be too quick to pass up those little comments and details that are thrown in there. Ask yourself, why are they there? For example, Moroni could have just said, "the ancient inhabitants who were destroyed by the hand of the Lord." But by adding "those ancient inhabitants" and "upon the face of this north country," and even adding the word "this" to the north country, it offers to tell us a whole other story. Don't miss out on those details as you read. So moving on, Moroni indicates that the first part of the record of the Jaredites is very similar to what we have from Moses in the book of Genesis. Now, the Jaredites did not have the book written by Moses, as he lived and wrote well after they had landed on the American continents. Their story starts about 2000 BC, and Moses lived about 1500 BC, so they were well established by the time he showed up and wrote his 5 books. However, we have discussed before, and I will remind you here, about the apocalyptic vision that is given to all the prophets. That vision is of the world from the beginning to end and all the inhabitants thereof. We have discussed Moses and Isaiah and Nephi and John the Beloved, all of whom have shared parts of that vision with us. Well, the Jaredites had prophets who were also party to that vision, and they recorded that part which the Lord allowed them to share. So Moroni says here, "And as I suppose that the first part of this record, which speaks concerning the creation of the world, and also of Adam, and an account from that time even to the great tower, and whatsoever things transpired among the children of men until that time, is had among the Jews. Therefore I do not write those things which transpired from the days of Adam until that time." And then he teases us. He says, "But they are had upon the plates, and whoso findeth them, the same will have power that he may get the full account." See, that's intriguing to me. Does that mean that someday the church or someone within the church may reveal the 24 gold plates and we may get the fuller account? That would be cool. We know we're only getting an abridgment from Mormon. He begins by giving us a genealogy of Ether, the author of this record, and at least 27 forefathers, although a couple of times he says who was a descendant of, so there probably were a few more. The genealogy gets down to Jared, whose story begins this tale. Actually, the story gets down to 2 people, Jared and his brother, known only as the brother of Jared. Why he is not named in the book is never explained, and we only know it because in 1834, Reynolds Cahoon's wife had a baby boy. The story goes like this. While residing in Kirtland, Ohio, Elder Reynolds Cahoon had a son born to him. One day, when President Joseph Smith was passing his door, he called the prophet in and asked him to bless and name the baby. Joseph did so and gave the boy the name of Mahonri Moriankamer. When he had finished the blessing, he laid the child on the bed, and turning to Elder Cahoon, he said, "The name I have given your son is the name of the brother of Jared. The Lord has just shown it to me." Elder William F. Cahoon, a child at the time, who was standing near, heard the prophet make this statement to his father, and this was the first time the name of the brother of Jared was known in the church in this dispensation. In many ways, the early story is more about this brother than it is about Jared. He is certainly the most prominent character of the first 6 chapters. The great church scholar Daniel Ludlow gives one possible reason for omitting his name. He suggested it may have been too difficult for Moroni, or perhaps Mosiah, to translate or transliterate the name into the Nephite language. It's fun to think about, but not really important. Anyway, our account of the Jaredites begins at the Tower of Babel when the Lord confounded the language of the people because of their wickedness. At that time, the concentration of the population of the world was apparently centered pretty much in Mesopotamia, and the Lord swore to scatter them upon all the face of the earth. That being the case, there must be hundreds of other stories of people who were scattered at that time also. I wonder if any of those accounts will ever come forth. But at least we have this one fascinating account. It seems that Jared was the leader of the people, but the record makes clear that it was his brother who was the spiritual leader and prophet. So what we have here is really 2 stories, a secular history of Jared's people and a spiritual history of their interactions with God through his brother during their dispersal. Jared clearly relied on his brother for all their dealings with the Lord. In verse 34 we read, "And the brother of Jared, being a large and mighty man, and a man highly favored of the Lord, Jared his brother said unto him, Cry unto the Lord that he will not confound us, that we may not understand our words." Jared asked his brother to plead with the Lord not to confound the language of their friends as well, and he also asked his brother to find out where they should go as part of this scattering. He said, "Cry unto him whither we shall go, and who knoweth but the Lord will carry us forth into a land which is choice above all the earth." Well, the Lord heard his prayers and answered him, saying, "Go to, gather thy flocks, both male and female, of every kind, and thy families, and also Jared thy brother, and his families, and also thy friends and their families, and the friends of Jared and their families." Now, this was quite a response, and also a significant assignment the Lord placed on the brother of Jared. It was almost like the assignment Noah received prior to the flood. But let's think about it for a minute. We're not talking about a post-apocalyptic time where all life was destroyed except for Noah and his family. We're talking about a scattering of the people into distant and diverse lands. Personally, I don't think the brother of Jared was being tasked with gathering elephants and zebras and lions and such. I think he was being asked to gather all the animals that would be of benefit for them wherever they ended up. And when the scripture says, "of every kind," I'm comfortable with interpreting that as, "of every kind that you will need." I don't think they needed the animals other than for the journey across Asia, and I certainly don't think they took them on the barges with them. I think it's reasonable to assume that wherever they ended up, there would be flora and fauna indigenous to that area. After all, it was going to be a choice land above all others. The brother of Jared was not being tasked with repopulating a dead and sterile world. They were simply moving to a new spot. Now again, that's just my opinion and not to be taken as doctrine, but I offer it to you. The Lord follows up with, "And when thou hast done this, thou shalt go down into the valley which is northward, and there I will meet thee, and I will go before thee into a land which is choice above all the lands of the earth. And there will I bless thee and thy seed, and raise up unto me of thy seed and of the seed of thy brother, and they who shall go with thee, a great nation, and there shall be none greater than the nation which I shall raise up unto me of thy seed upon all the face of the earth. And thus I will do unto thee, because this long time ye have cried unto me." When the Lord says he will bless them because this long time ye have cried unto me, we have to remember that the whole reason the Lord was confounding the languages of the people in the first place was because the people had all turned away from him. We can find this in Genesis chapter 11. There, the record says, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded." Kind of, it should have been built, but they said builded. "And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon all the face of the earth. So as we begin chapter 2 of Ether, we see that Jared and his brother did as the Lord asked, and when they were prepared, they took their journey northward into a valley called Nimrod, being named for that mighty hunter. Again, let's go back to Genesis. In Genesis 10, just before the Tower of Babel incident, we see that Nimrod was the son of Cush, and it sounds like he built the city of Babel. The book of Ether calls him a mighty hunter, and we find the same reference in the Bible. Genesis 10, verses 8 and 9 says, "And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel." So we can deduce that this valley of Nimrod was not a new and distant place. And when the Lord told the brother of Jared that they were going to a land which was choice above all other lands, he didn't mean the valley of Nimrod. Had that been the case, and that land which was choice above all other lands was right there in the next valley, the place would have already been fully populated. The valley of Nimrod was just to be the staging area for the preparations for the real journey that was about to commence. As we read verses 4 and 5 of Ether 2, we can see this. "And it came to pass that when they had come down into the valley of Nimrod, the Lord came down and talked with the brother of Jared, and he was in a cloud, and the brother of Jared saw him not. And it came to pass that the Lord commanded them that they should go forth into the wilderness, yea, into that quarter where there never had man been. And it came to pass that the Lord did go before them, and did talk with them as he stood in the cloud, and gave directions whither they should travel." Before I go on, I should remind you that I've already done a Digging Deeper episode on the Book of Ether that you might find very interesting. It's episode number 5. It's titled "The Odd Inclusion of the Book of Ether," and it speaks of how strange it is that the Book of Ether is even in the Book of Mormon, and all of the controversy that it engendered during the early days of the church. I encourage you to check it out when you have time. As we continue, we find some strange directives, including this. "And it came to pass that they did travel in the wilderness, and did build barges, in the which they did cross many waters, being directed continually by the hand of the Lord." In my previous episode, number 5, I go into quite a bit of detail on this whole crossing the many waters passage. This is not speaking about the barges they built to cross the ocean. Rather, it is speaking of other, smaller barges used to cross the many waters on the Asian continents. Now, you may look at a map of Asia today and not see many great bodies of water, but again, I go into this in detail in episode number 5. You see, they crossed Asia from the Valley of Nimrod in Mesopotamia, way out on the western side, all the way to the east to China, where they eventually set in with different barges and crossed the Pacific Ocean. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but you'll see this clearly in a bit. The scriptures continue to seem a little confusing here as they say, and the Lord would not suffer that they should stop beyond the sea in the wilderness, but he would that they should come forth unto the land of promise, which was choice above all other lands, which the Lord God had preserved for a righteous people. And then I'd like to add this one additional verse. It says, "And he swore in his wrath unto the brother of Jared, that whoso should possess this land of promise, from that time henceforth and forever, should serve him, the true and only God, or they should be swept off when the fullness of his wrath should come upon them." And at this point, Moroni stops from the record and adds a personal comment. These are his words coming up, not from the golden plates. But remember, he has just witnessed the complete and utter destruction of his own people, and he alone is left to record that tragedy. He says, "And now we can behold the decrees of God concerning this land, that it is a land of promise, and whatsoever nation shall possess it shall serve God, or they shall be swept off when the fullness of his wrath shall come upon them." I wanted to read these verses to you because you should already know that these people, these Jaredites, would one day turn wicked and would be utterly destroyed. And as we have read in the rest of the Book of Mormon, the Nephites would follow suit 2,000 years later, and it would be due to their wickedness as well. This land was for people who would serve God and no others. Now you may ask, well, but what about the Lamanites? Why weren't they swept off as well? That's a very good question, and there is an answer and a reason, but I really don't want to get too sidetracked here today. So maybe we'll discuss that after the Come Follow Me program is over for this year, and I can just get back to my regular Digging Deeper episodes. Anyway, Mormon continues on with his thoughts on this subject for a few more verses, and then he gets back to the record. He says, "And now I proceed with my record." Now, I want to go back for just a minute to verse 3. We skipped over that. As the people gathered provisions for their journey, we read this, "And they did also carry with them Deseret, which by interpretation is a honeybee. And thus they did carry with them swarms of honeybees, and all manner of that which was upon the face of the earth." This is where we get the word Deseret. It is a word unique to the Book of Mormon, and more specifically unique to the Book of Ether. Once revealed, the word became extensively used in early Utah and still today. One of the newspapers in Salt Lake City is the Deseret News, and the word Deseret is used in a number of businesses, including banks and other institutions. The state symbol of the state of Utah is a beehive, and the honeybee is the state insect, as it is also the state insect of 12 other states. If he had been making up this tale in the Book of Mormon, and if he had made up this word as part of a fantastical tale, Joseph Smith could have gotten away with it until scientific and archaeological research caught up with him years later. Only then would his fraud have been revealed. However, he didn't make this up. The story is true. And when archaeologists finally got into Egypt and finally learned how to interpret ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and Coptic, they discovered that the symbol, let me go with the name first. As archaeologists were uncovering the history of a dynasty called the Red Crown of Lower Egypt, they learned that the official name of this dynasty was Deshret, meaning the red one. Now that's very similar to our word Deseret. In partnership with the White Crowned dynasty, the two were referred to as the Peshent, and in Egypt were called the Sekhemtai. In Egyptian, there are no vowels. So, for the word Deshret, they would have actually seen DSRT or something like that. And then they had to guess the missing vowels to get the whole word. It doesn't take too much imagination to see that Deshret and Deseret could both be interpreted from the consonants DSRT. Now here's the cool part. For the Egyptian name for the red crown of Lower Egypt, the symbol or hieroglyph is a honeybee. Is that extraordinary? What a lucky guess that would have been for Joseph Smith had he been making up this whole story. And with regard to the barges they used to travel across the many waters of Asia, well, today there are not so many large bodies of water across the continent. But 4,000 years ago was another story. Back then, the whole face of the earth was covered with many large bodies of water as a result of the extraordinary melt and runoff from the earlier Ice Age. Again, I refer you to my episode number 5, where we get into this in much more detail than I want to delve into today. Let me just provide, as evidence of large bodies of water that no longer exist, right there in Utah, Lake Bonneville, the early gigantic lake that covered much of northern Utah and from which the Great Salt Lake is the vestigial remnant. If you want more detail, go to episode 5. The barges that the Lord directed the brother of Jared are not mentioned much after the initial directive to build them, nor is the journey across Asia. But eventually they arrived at the eastern shores of probably what is today China, and it says, "And it came to pass that the Lord did bring Jared and his brethren forth even to that great sea which divideth the lands." Now here I think we are talking about the Pacific Ocean. "And as they came to the sea, they pitched their tents, and they called the land Moriankamer, and they dwelt in tents upon the seashore for the space of 4 years." Now here is the only place where we see the word Moriankamer, as in Mahonri Moriankamer, and we might assume that the land was named Moriankamer after the brother of Jared, but that's only speculation, and that's the only time we see it. Now, this 4 years seems like a long time to stop in the middle of the journey, but perhaps at the beginning they thought the journey was over. You'll recall that Lehi and Ishmael and their families also stopped at the seashore for several years while they built their boat to cross an ocean. But this apparently was different. There was an interesting exchange between the brother of Jared and the Lord. "And it came to pass at the end of the 4 years that the Lord came again unto the brother of Jared, and stood in a cloud and talked with him." That kind of tells me that the Lord hadn't been talking to him for about 4 years. "And for the space of 3 hours did the Lord talk with the brother of Jared, and chasten him, because he remembered not to call upon the name of the Lord." It seems from this that perhaps the reason the Jaredites stayed at the seashore for 4 years is because they stopped seeking direction from the Lord. They may have been content where they were, and if they did think their journey was over, there would have been less reason to seek out the Lord for guidance. In any event, I can't imagine a 3-hour conversation with the Lord, and I'm sure everything he does is with the greatest love, but still, if it was 3 hours of chastening, that must have been tough for the brother of Jared. I'm hoping for his sake that there was more discussed than that. The brother of Jared repented, and the Lord forgave them all, but warned them that his spirit would not always strive with people who did not call upon him. It was during this discussion that the Lord indicated that they were not through with their journey. He said, "And these are my thoughts upon the land which I shall give you for your inheritance, for it shall be a land choice above all other lands." Perhaps their reaction was, "Oh, this isn't the land?" But in any event, the Lord gives them another task. And here is where we see that the barges they built before were not the ocean-going ones that would carry them to the New World. And the Lord said, "Go to work and build after the manner of the barges which ye have hitherto built." And it shall come to pass that the brother of Jared did go to work and also his brethren, and built barges after the manner which they had built, according to the instructions of the Lord. And they were small, and they were light upon the water, even the lightness of a fowl upon the water. And they were built after a manner that they were exceedingly tight, even that they would hold water like unto a dish. And the bottom thereof was tight like unto a dish, and the sides thereof were tight like unto a dish, and the ends thereof were peaked, and the top thereof was tight like unto a dish, and the length thereof was the length of a tree. And the door thereof, when it was shut, was tight like unto a dish. And when the barges were finished, the brother of Jared saw a problem. And remember, these were designed by the Lord. So the brother of Jared took his concern to the Lord for help. He knew that the Lord didn't make mistakes, but there were two glaring problems with the barges that the brother of Jared needed to understand better. So we read, "And it came to pass that the brother of Jared cried unto the Lord, saying, O Lord, I have performed the work which thou hast commanded me, and I have made the barges, according as thou hast directed me. And behold, O Lord, in them there is no light. Whither shall we steer? And also we shall perish, for in them we cannot breathe, save it is the air which is in them. Therefore we shall perish." I think I mentioned earlier that it was the Book of Ether that generated the most ardent criticism of the Book of Mormon, and this story of the barges was the center focus for that criticism. Critics were sure that Joseph Smith must have made this all up because it seemed so fantastic and absurd. But there are a couple of interesting things right here I'd like to point out. One is that I don't believe Joseph Smith understood in 1830 the chemistry behind our atmosphere. You know, the nitrogen, the oxygen, the carbon dioxide, and the fact that if you take a closed container, make it airtight, and put a bunch of people in it and let them just breathe, pretty soon the oxygen is replaced with carbon dioxide and the people will die. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I don't think it was a very commonly known principle of science in the day. And I know that Joseph Smith had not gone to school and had not studied science, and more specifically, had not studied chemistry, which was only in its infancy at that time. And yet here in this record, the brother of Jared is petitioning the Lord, saying, how are we going to do this? Because if we keep the doors closed, we're going to die. I find that interesting. And then also there's this whole subject of light. And so in verse 20, the Lord answers the brother of Jared, and he says, first speaking of the issue of the air, "Behold, thou shalt make a hole in the top, and also in the bottom. And when thou shalt suffer for air, thou shalt unstop the hole, and receive air. And if it so be that the water come in upon thee, behold, ye shall stop the hole, that ye may not perish in the flood." What an interesting detail that is, that you could build these boats that are ostensibly going across the ocean, and yet the Lord wants you to put a hole in the top and a hole in the bottom. Who ever thought of such a thing? In episode 5, I discussed this in detail, so again, I direct you there for more information. In that podcast, I tell of a man who gave a fireside just on this subject, this deal with the barges and the holes in them, and it was quite fascinating and compelling and convincing, and I've remembered that for over 50 years now. Anyway, the brother of Jared did as the Lord commanded and put holes in the barges, but then he still had to address the other issue, the matter of light. Now, I think this is a good place to stop for today. As I said at the beginning, I ran ahead a little bit last week by covering all of the Book of Mormon, so we should be finishing that up today. So to get back on schedule, I think I'll stop here. So this is just a sneak peek ahead, a preview of the Book of Ether. Next week, we'll see how the Jaredites got light for their barges, and we'll get to read one of the most extraordinary events in all of the Book of Mormon. So please come back for that, won't you? Until then, have a great week. I'm Mark Swent. Thank you for listening.